Hey guys, so I'm going to start a new book today, and I hope you enjoyed the one and only Bob. I know that I got a little bit emotional in that, but that's because it's just the best book ever, and I know for sure I will in this book too. This is called Chains. It's by Laurie Halse Anderson, and you might hear a little bit of noise in the background because we're having rain today, and it's just coming through, and it's just wonderful. I already have my tissues here in case I get a little choked up, but I love this series. It's a trilogy. The first book in it is Chains. It's officially called the Seeds of America trilogy. It's got 3 books in it, and I think I'm actually going to go through and read them all because they're phenomenal. And I've had several classes just beg me to read all of them as a read aloud, so I want to give you guys the chance to listen to them. But the first book in it is called Chains, and the second book is called Forge, and then the last book in this trilogy is called Ashes. So they're set during the American Revolution, and we're going to be following an amazing woman, and I'm just going to get into it. I hope you guys love it as much as I do, so here we go. Oh, and it was a National Book Award finalist and a Scott Odell Award winner. So you'll notice on this one there's a couple little shiny jewels. Okay. Oh, and she also wrote Fever, 1793, which is also another amazing book. So you might recognize Laurie Halse Anderson. Okay, here we go. Part 1. Oh, and just like Anne when we read Blood on the River, she's going to have quotes or primary sources at the beginning of each chapter. So I'll be reading those with you. And just as a reminder, our primary source is from that time period. And one of the things I love about Laurie Halse Anderson in this series, she does such great research to just pick the perfect primary source to go with it. And it really just adds to it. Okay, here we go. Chapter 1. Monday, May 27th, 1776. Youth is the seed time of good habits as well in nations as in individuals. And that's from Thomas Paine's Common Sense. So that's a incredibly famous pamphlet from the time period that's going to spread a whole bunch of ideas about what it means to be a human and to be free. So Thomas Paine, Common Sense might be something fun for you to just Google and get a little more information if you're an American history buff. The best time to talk to ghosts is just before the sun comes up. That's when they can hear us, Mama said. That's when ghosts can answer us. The eastern sky was peach-colored, but a handful of lazy stars still blinked in the west. It was almost time. "May I run ahead, sir?" I asked. Pastor Week sat at the front of his squeaky wagon with old Ben next to him, the mule's reins loose in his hands. The pine coffin that held Miss Mary Finch, wearing her best dress, with her hair washed clean and combed, bounced in the back when the wagon wheels hit a rut. My sister Ruth sat next to the coffin. Ruth was too big to carry, plus the pastor knew about her peculiar manner of being. So it was the wagon for her, and the road for me. Old Ben looked to the east and gave me a little nod. He knew a few things about ghosts, too. Pastor Weeks turned around to talk to Mr. Robert Finch, who rode his horse a few lengths behind the wagon. "The child wants to run ahead," Pastor explained to him. "She has kin buried there, so kin is family." "Do you give leave for a quick visit?" Mr. Robert's mouth tightened like a rope pulled taut. He had showed up a few weeks earlier to visit Miss Mary Finch, his aunt, and only living relation. He looked around her tidy farm, listened to her ragged, wet cough, and moved in. Miss Mary wasn't even cold in her deathbed when he helped himself to the coins in her strong-box. He hurried along her burying, too, most improper. He didn't care that the neighbors would want to come around with cakes and platters of cold meat and drink ale to the memory of Miss Mary Finch of 2, Rhode Island. He had to get on with things, he said. I stole a look backwards. Mr. Robert Finch was filled up with trouble from his dirty boots to the brim of his scraggly hat. "Please, sir," I said. "Go then," he said, "but don't tarry. I've much business today." I ran as fast as I could. I hurried past the stone fence that surrounded the white graveyard to the split-rail fence that marked our ground, and stopped outside the gate to pick a handful of chilly violets wet with dew. The morning mist twisted and hung low over the fields. No ghosts yet. Just ash trees and maples lined up in a mournful row. I entered. Mama was buried in back, her feet to the east, her head to the west. Some day I would pay the stone carver for a proper marker with her name on it. Diana, wife of Kufi, mother of Isabel and Ruth. For now, there was a wooden cross and a gray rock the size of a dinner plate lying flat on the ground in front of it. We had buried her the year before, when the first roses bloomed. Smallpox is tricky, Miss Mary Finch said to me when Mama died. There's no telling who it'll take. The pox had left Ruth and me with scars, like tiny stars scattered on our skin. It took Mama home to our Maker. So smallpox is going to be an illness at this time, and it's going to be really common to see people that have survived smallpox with scars, just like she's describing all over their face. And that's going to be just something with each time period. So right now we have our COVID-19 where we are dealing with that. And then in this time period, they're going to have smallpox and then other illnesses. I looked back at the road. Old Ben had slowed the mules to give me time. I knelt down and set the violets on the grave. It's here, Mama, I whispered. The day you promised, but I need your help. Can you please cross back over just for a little bit? I stared without blinking at the mist, looking for the curve of her back or the silhouette of her head wrapped in a pretty kerchief. A small flock of robins swooped out of the maple trees. I don't have much time, I told the grass-covered grave. Where do you want us to go? What should we do? The mist swirled between the tall grass and the low, hanging branches. 2 black butterflies danced through a cloud of bugs and disappeared. Chickadees and barn swallows called overhead. Whoa! Old Ben stopped the wagon next to the open hole near the iron fence, then climbed down and walked to where Nehema the gravedigger was waiting. The 2 men reached for the coffin. Please, Mama, I whispered urgently. I need your help. I squinted into the ash grove where the mist was heaviest. No ghosts. Nothing. I'd been making like this for a year now. No matter what I said or where the sun and the moon and the stars hung, Mama never answered. Maybe she was angry because I'd buried her wrong. I'd heard stories of old country burials with singers and dancers, but I wasn't sure what to do. So we just dug a hole and said a parcel of prayers. Maybe Mama's ghost was lost and wandering because I didn't send her home the right way. The men set Miss Mary's coffin on the ground. Mr. Robert got off his horse and said something I couldn't hear. Ruth stayed in the wagon, her bare feet curled up under her skirt and her thumb in her mouth. I reached in the pocket under my apron and took out the oat cake. It was in 2 pieces, with honey smeared between them. The smell made my stomach rumble, but I didn't dare nibble. I picked up the flat rock in front of the cross and set the offering on the hollow underneath it. Then I put the rock back and sat still, my eyes closed tight to keep the tears inside my head where they belonged. I could smell the honey that dripped on my hands, the damp ground under me, the salt of the ocean. I could hear cows mooing in a far pasture and bees buzzing in a nearby clover patch. If she would just say my name, just once. Girl! Mr. Roberts shouted. You there! Girl! I sniffed, opened my eyes, and wiped my face on my sleeve. The sun had popped up in the east like a cork and was burning through the morning mist. The ghosts had all gone to ground. I wouldn't see her today, either. He grabbed my arm and pulled me roughly to my feet. I told you to move, Mr. Roberts snarled at me. Apologies, sir, I said, wincing with pain. He released me with a shove and pointed to the cemetery where they buried white people. Go pray for her that owned you, girl. So we know so far that she's a slave. We know that she has a sister named Ruth, and we know that her mom has died. And now Mr. Roberts has taken over the ownership of the land and everything that Miss Mary Finch owned, including the enslaved people. Chapter 2. Monday, May 27th, 1776. I, young in life, by seeming cruel fate, was snatched from Africa's fancied happy seat, that from a father seized his babe beloved, such my case, and can I then but pray others may never feel tyrannic sway? This was written by Phillis Wheatley to the Right Honorable William, Earl of Dartmouth. So Phillis Wheatley is going to be a famous African-American poet and writer, and if you're interested in writings from this time period by a woman, I would definitely do a little bit of research on Phillis Wheatley. Amen, we said together. Pastor Weeks closed his Bible, and the funeral was over. Nehemiah drove his shovel into the mound of dirt and pitched some into the open grave. The earth rattled and bounced on the coffin lid. Old Ben put on his hat and walked towards the mule team. Mr. Robert reached for coins to pay the pastor. Ruth drew a line in the dust with her toe. My belly flipped with worry. I was breathing hard, as if I'd run all the way to the village and back. This was the moment we'd been waiting for, the one that Mama promised would come. It was up to me to take care of things, find a place for us. I had to be bold. I stood up proper, the way I'd been taught, chin up, eyes down, took Ruth by the hand, and walked over to the men. "Pardon me, Pastor Weeks, sir," I said. "May I ask you something?" He set his hat on his head. "Certainly, Isabel." I held Ruth's hand tighter. "Where do you think we should go?" "What do you mean, child?" "I know we'll find work, but I can't figure where to sleep, me and Ruth. I thought you might know a place." Pastor Weeks frowned. "I don't understand what you're saying, Isabel. You're to return with Mr. Robert here. You and your sister belong to him now." I spoke slowly, saying the words I practiced in my head since Miss Mary Finch took her last breath, the words that would change everything. "Ruth and me are free, Pastor. Miss Finch freed us in her will. Mama, too, if she'd lived. It was done up legal on paper with wax seals." Mr. Robert snorted. "That's enough out of you, girl. Time for us to be on the road to Newport." "There was a will?" Pastor Weeks asked him. "She didn't need one," Mr. Roberts replied. "I was Aunt Mary's only relative." I planted my feet firmly in the ground and fought to keep my voice polite and proper. "I saw the will, sir, after the lawyer wrote it. Miss Mary had me read it out loud on account of her eyes being bad." "Slaves don't read," Mr. Roberts said. "I should beat you for lying, girl." Pastor Weeks held up his hand. "It's true. Your aunt had some odd notions. She taught the child herself. I disapproved, but of course, only leads to trouble." I spoke up again. "We're to be freed, sir. The lawyer, Mr. Cornell, he'll tell you. Ruth and me, we're going to get work and a place of our own to sleep." "That's enough." Mr. Robert narrowed his eyes at me. "But Mr. Cornell," I started. "Shut your mouth," he snapped. The pastor cleared his throat. Perhaps we should inquire." "Where is this Cornell?" Mr. Roberts demanded. "Newport? He left for Boston before the blockade," the pastor said. "Took his papers with him." "The girl is lying, then," Mr. Roberts said. "She knows the lawyer is absent, and her cause cannot be proved. The sooner I'm rid of her, the better." "It's the truth," I blurted out. Ruth looked up at me anxiously and gripped my hand tighter. "I said silence," Mr. Robert yelled. "Isabel, remember your place," Pastor Weeks fumbled with the latch on his Bible. "You and your sister belong to Mr. Roberts now. He'll be a good master to you." My insides went cold, like I'd swallowed water straight from a deep, dark well. This couldn't be happening. "Could you send a message to Boston seeking Mr. Cornell?" "The matter is settled." Mr. Roberts pulled on his gloves. "If I might borrow your wagon and a man for the drive to Newport, Pastor, I'd be grateful. These girls should bring a decent price at auction." "You're selling us?" The words flew out of my mouth before I could weigh them. "Hush, Isabel," Pastor Weeks cautioned. The cold inside me snaked down to my feet and pulled up around my neck. I shivered in the warm spring sunshine. Ruth bent down and picked up a shiny pebble. "What if we're split up? Who would take care of her?" I fought back the tears. "Pastor Weeks, please, sir." Mr. Robert knocked the dust from his hat. "They should go quick. Your wagon will be back by nightfall." The minister placed the Bible in his leather satchel and pulled it up over his shoulder. He studied the ground, his hands, Mr. Robert's horse, and the clouds. He did not look at me. "You'll be wanting to bring their shoes and blankets," he finally said. "They'll fetch a better price that way." "True enough. I'll have a word with Ben, explain matters." Pastor Weeks walked towards his own slave, keeping a hand on the satchel so it didn't bump against his side. "So what happened?" I want you to think about what's happened so far. So legally, their owner and slaver decided to free them upon her death, and they're not going to honor it. And neither man is going to stand up for them. So Pastor Weeks could try to support, but he's not. You can tell he feels bad because he's not looking at her. So it might seem odd at this time period that even though it's in a document and that it's legal, but with the chaos of the war and with people wanting to systematically keep people enslaved, they're not going to make sure that the legal part of it is followed, that she should be free with her sister. My heart wanted to force my feet to run, but I couldn't feel them. Couldn't feel my hands, nor my arms, nor any part of myself. I had froze solid, sticking to the dirt. We were sold once before, back when Ruth was a tiny baby, not even baptized yet. They sold all of us from the plantation when old Mr. Malbone run up his debts too high. His bankers wanted the profits, or wanted their pounds of flesh, our flesh. One by one they dragged us forward, and a man shouted out prices to the crowd like buyers, and baby Ruth cried, and Mama shook like the last leaf on a tree. And Papa. He didn't want them to bust up our family like we were sheep or hogs. I am a man, he shouted. And he was Mama's husband and our father, and baby Ruth. She cried, and I thought Mama would shatter like a bowl when it falls off a table. Papa fought like a lion when they came for him, the strongest lion roaring. It took 5 of them with hickory clubs, and then Mama fainted, and I caught baby Ruth just in time, and there was lion's blood on the ground mixed with the dust like the very earth was bleeding. And we left there, we 3 in Miss Mary Finch's wagon, and everything in the whole world was frozen ice for nearly 2 years after that. I opened my mouth to roar, but not a sound escaped. I could not even mewl like a kitten. Whew. All right, so I'm going to read a little bit more later, but it is time for me to have my lunch and then check my emails to see what else is going on. So I hope you guys enjoyed the beginning of this. It is definitely a rough start to the book, but it gets so wonderful. You're going to, if you're not hooked already, you're going to love it. All right, I'll see you guys later.